we only look after Microsoft-related costs. Value realization, cost savings. As Stefan puts it, we sell savings. It's not always savings. Sometimes it's the other way around, commitment management. And what I wanted to talk about today is the noise around Microsoft. If you're looking after licensing in your organization, you probably browse LinkedIn, you probably follow somebody who posts news about Microsoft. Microsoft increased price on that, Microsoft increased price on this. Imagine procurement people who only look at it every 3 years, sometimes every 5 years, because they have other things to manage. And then suddenly, you receive a new bill of material, and there's an increase on price, and you sit there thinking, what's happening? Why we had to pay, I'll bring a hypothetical number, we had to pay 9 million a year, now we have to pay 14 or 15 million a year. What's happened? The problem with the last 3 years is it all turned upside down. In the market, there's a paradigm shift. This is a summary of actually our client base in the last year. And it's amazing where the attention, the actual financial attention should be, where it lies. Microsoft 365 and the massively growing percentage of Azure. And a big surprise for me was, actually 2 surprises, is that telephony, and I'm not talking about Teams conferencing, the actual phone systems based on Teams are suddenly somewhere between 10 and 20% across all the clients. That was a surprise. What you won't see in this slide, which was the opposite surprise, is that Microsoft claims that Dynamics is about 18% of their revenue, licensing revenue. Microsoft Dynamics. It's not here. It's hidden somewhere in the Power Platform. This is the reality of what we deal with. But for some of you, Dynamics may be a big chunk of things. Where Microsoft's also efforts lie right now in 2025 is they completely drop the ball on licensing. They don't care anymore. They don't give discounts on traditional licensing on premises here, Windows Server. The discounts went into pay-as-you-go, into Azure consumption, and well, they still exist to an extent. If you take Microsoft 365 for 5, if you're a big company, there's a reasonable chance you can negotiate 30% discount still on E5, but you have to be very big. So discounts are also decreasing. If you talk to your procurement, their attention should be obviously where the main expenses are. And in this diagram, the most significant increase was just recently in telephony. And why this is important is that during the contract, your prices don't change. When you renew, you're faced with a new reality. And all the changes that happened in the last 3 years, they do accumulate. That's why prices suddenly go up. But not only because of this. Rebundling. Microsoft last year migrated Power BI from licenses to an Azure expense, Fabric. And now it's not only the double price for many, it's also in a different bucket. It's an Azure now. SQL Server used to be a massive chunk of on-premise. Microsoft stopped offering any discounts on SQL entirely. But if you go with SQL Server with Azure Arc, the pay-as-you-go model, which is an Azure expense, then I wouldn't disclose the discounts, but they are eye-watering because it's a scorecard product. People get bonuses for pushing SQL with Azure Arc. And by the way, price-wise, it's a very reasonable change. So therefore, the adoption is fantastic and it's becoming an Azure expense. So if in 2022, the traditional approach when we help with negotiating contracts was start with optimization. Look at your on-premise licensing. Was still already diminishing, but still a big thing. Together with procurement, we negotiated discounts and then basically it went into the phase of reactive management. Now we're facing the reality when you jump to negotiations straight away. The old school optimization is still important. Microsoft 365 is big. And repackaging the product, if you still use Microsoft 365 E3, and Microsoft will actively push you to E5 because, again, it's their flagship product. They don't touch its price. They increase the prices on all the other packages. Still, with the proper packaging, alternative security products, E3 may be cheaper than E5 with fantastic discounts. So that is where the optimization lies these days, roughly. But because of the growth of the cloud, procurement lost control. If I give my son £100 lunch money, this is my negotiated cloud commitment. I give him £100, he can spend it on 10 lunches, UK is expensive, or he can have a night out. Fantastic experience, a nutritional disaster. That is how it works right now on the cloud. Fortunately, he's only 5 years old and he doesn't know what a night out is. But it's coming. This is why I brought here Stefan, who's our head of cloud. And he will talk about basically what he does. So, thank you. And if you have questions for me, I'll take them.
Thank you, Sasha. I would first like to explain what EDA costs are for the non-German speakers. This is basically your traditional IT. You have been relying on infrastructure, which was bought at one point in time, that usually set in your data center for 5 years, and it was there anyways. EDA cost is what we call this thing in German. This has happened over decades. And this has bred the idea that you are basically able to use what is already there, and you never really had to look into the IT spend as an individual contributor in the IT teams. If you are an engineer building system, if you are an operations person maintaining the system, the financial side has always been taken care of for you. And the problem that we have in a world where we are getting with the cloud now more and more into a basically, as I put it here, keep inserting coins. It is now continuous consumption. Cloud providers were really looking hard at classic infrastructure, and we're trying to figure out how to put an in-game store with microtransactions into this whole business. Because now it's services. The line items, if I look at a cloud bill, the average cost of a line item is about 50 cents. So this is the absolute microtransaction limit. I mean, it's the day-by-day cost of services. And sure, there are a lot of services which are much more expensive. But if you look at a €500,000 a month bill, it tends to have 1 million lines and then some 60 columns, which is why a whole lot of people don't really bend their mind around this complexity, because it's just looking so overwhelming. And what Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Alibaba, and the other cloud providers have basically pulled off is they have managed to create infrastructure as a service. And like our microservices community, which we know and love from mobile games, I mean, who hasn't spent some money on one of these games there? The thing is that you basically need to keep on inserting coins in order to be allowed to play in the first place, because the cloud, as Sasha has put it already, is now negotiated once, and then it is getting consumed by IT professionals who actually may have a higher spending authority through their admin access to the cloud portal than the CIO has. So we've been in companies where the CIO had a discretionary spending limit of like 50,000 euros. Hey, as a cloud engineer setting up a system which costs 300,000 euros in a month, no problem, just do it. Forget to shut it down once your test run is completed. Yeah, happens. Eventually rectify, power down the whole thing again a few months later, look at $1 million or more in damages. It's not usually a good conversation to have. But these are all the things which are happening. And they're kind of happening left and right, because at the end of the time, IT learned to build reliable system, performance system, well-functioning systems which are as little maintenance as possible. What IT has never learned to do is to build economically efficient systems. And this is where the whole FinOps conversation, the whole cloud conversation has started, where we have to move from it's sitting there anyway towards literally every minute you're bleeding money in the cloud. And this is a hard change to get towards from your mind shift. It tends to work quite well when you do a first optimization exercise with your internal people, and then you produce one cost curve where the cost is dropping down. Because what we see a whole lot of the time is just like tidying up at home. I mean, nobody loves tidying up. If I try to tell my kids to please tidy up their room, and you help us tidy up our rooms as well, this tends to get procrastinated. It's the same with a complex Azure environment, which is usually not a sculpted landscape. Sure, system-wise it is, but cost-wise it is more like Brombeerstrauch, I don't know, thicket of thorns. Tackling that is complicated. And you always have the opportunity to go the easy way, which is at the end of the day, you're taking on a personal problem and spending company money on it instead. Or you have the opportunity to start causing waves. And this is where taking ownership and responsibility is at the end of the day a manager problem, much more than an individual contributor's problem. If you go into companies and we work with our customers, we see that there are always individual contributors who know. So if you're coming in and we say, hey, there are these 8 things we would like you to work on, they usually go like, yeah, I know. Nobody listens to me. So getting this as a top of mind thing for at least a small group of people with some higher level management support is crucial in order to get these changes in, because it usually also means some interdisciplinary conversations need to happen. We're talking about licenses today, and I'm going to bring one example with licenses on the next and last slide. But in order for the engineer to use the licenses which you may already have, or where you have a good in the economic contract for, which is way cheaper than to rent them from the cloud, the engineer now needs to talk with somebody in licensed procurement and figure out if procuring a license and being eligible to bring that license to the cloud is actually viable for the company, if it is cheaper. And you can now either have these conversations in your busy day, or you can just click on the let's take the license included button. Hey, it's easy, it's convenient, and it's only the company's money. It's not your personal time, which you may have to do at the evening. So the ability to respond, this is why I've wrote this response ability there. This is really super important to help the teams. And this is something which needs some help and some support from on high. FinOps started this whole transparency conversation. FinOps at least took a shot at giving you cost transparency. I mentioned this 1 million lines a month cloud bill. Nobody's gonna look at that. I mean, even Excel stops at 1 million lines. This is basically where 90% of the reporting tools then break down because a lot of people still use Excel. However, what we think is that the whole FinOps conversation, which is about cost transparency, is missing out on the real reason to do this, a bit like enterprise architecture. It is a beautiful picture, but it starts getting interesting once you get towards the optimization. And this is the great vision which I have for us. It is to build lean and efficient clouds where you are stopping to send donations to the cloud vendors and you are instead building a valuable IT infrastructure and you reclaim some of the money for investments. I would like to give you 5 things to take home with you and to have a conversation with your cloud engineers, with a cloud architect, with somebody who is in a leadership position, a team lead, operations teams. Usually is a very good person to have these conversations with and to ask these questions. Are we already doing something along these lines? Are we using our existing licenses, which we are entitled to bring into the cloud? Microsoft Server to Azure, no-brainer, much more cheaply. SQL Server works with most public clouds, also usually a cheaper option. Do we have some commitments for our long-term running systems? I still see SAP systems 24/7 running pay-as-you-go, and making a 3-year commitment would give you a 70% rebate, basically paying 3 times as much as you would have to. Can you maybe reserve more than only virtual machines? You can reserve a whole lot in the public clouds. Sentinel usage, log analytics, web servers, etc. So there's more to it than the virtual machines, which a lot of people know about. Can you maybe modernize our systems? I still see people running infrastructure which was designed in 2014. You wouldn't keep that in your data center, you would replace it. But they are still running in the public cloud. Why? Because to the engineer, they all look the same, they are running. It's a virtual machine with 8 CPUs, 32 gigabytes of RAM, but that it's only half as fast as the latest model, usually nobody is measuring. So by moving to the latest systems, you can oftentimes get way more power for the same cost. And when you get way more power, the last question is, can you maybe shrink oversized systems? Because if you can halve a system size, you automatically halve its cost. And this is probably the easiest way to do. But then when you're halving the system, you need to adjust your reservations. Also the one of long-running systems, and then maybe there's modernization and you need to reserve again. And all of a sudden you are in a continuous process. And this is the real challenge which companies face. And we are happy to help you there. So please approach with questions, anything that you have during the breaks. We are around the entire day. And yeah, handing back to you, Sasha.
Thank you, Stefan. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions now because we need to pass the mic to the next speakers.